Hello, welcome to this hip mobility workout with an inner thigh focus. I'm Coach Mike. Let's get moving. And we're going to start with hip openers. So have a seat on the floor with your hips at 90 degrees, knees also at 90 degrees, and you're going to rock your hips side to side like windshield wipers. If you find yourself crawling forward over time with this motion, just make smaller motions with your hips. Coming up next, we have hip openers with a glute stretch. So as your leg comes to the floor, reach your torso over top of the front thigh. Think about reaching your chest long and forward as opposed to downward. So we're reaching long through the spine. Things get a little more challenging here. We move to hip openers, coming up to kneeling on the front leg. When you reach the top of the motion, try to bring your hips squared, squeeze the glute muscles, and as you lower back down, lower with control, try not to fall down to the ground. Up next, we have lying hip circles with the left leg. So take your left knee into your left hand and use your arm to draw circles with the hip. Keep the hip muscles relaxed and make sure both butt cheeks stay in contact with the ground the whole time. Nice quick transition here. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, keeping both butt cheeks on the ground the whole time. Moving to hip internal rotations here. So bring both feet on the ground with your knees bent to 90, feet just wider than your shoulders or as wide as a yoga mat. Let your knees fall inward toward the midline, bringing the knee as far down as you can without lifting the hips too far off of the ground. Feeling a nice little stretch here in the front of the hips. Next, we have kneeling hip circles, so come to an all fours position. Make sure for the entire movement, you keep your right hip stacked over your right knee. You're going to take your left leg out to the side as high as you can without shifting off to the right. Then bring it up so the bottom of the foot faces up to the ceiling and make as large of a circle all the way back and around to the start position as you can. With this movement, it's better to use a smaller range of motion and keep the hips squared without shifting off to the right-hand side, rather than using a large range of motion and moving the hips side to side. And we're just changing directions here, so kick the leg straight back and up, then take the hip out to the left-hand side, keeping it as high as you can without shifting off to the right, and then back to our start position. It's really best to keep completely still everywhere else in the body except for the hip and just have the hip doing the motion. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So we're going to start with the right leg going out to the right, turning the bottom of the foot facing up and coming back to our start position, trying not to shift away to the left-hand side and keeping the rest of the body still. If you're doing this for the first time and you're feeling a cramping sensation in the hip muscles, don't worry, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means there's some opportunity in the strength of the hip. If you keep practicing, the discomfort eventually goes away as you get stronger. And coming up, you're just going to be reversing the direction. And coming up next, we're going to give the hips a bit of a break with a kneeling tuck, otherwise known as a child's pose. So you can put your arms above your head or down at your sides, whatever makes your hips feel most relaxed. We have our first big static stretch here with diamond frog. So to get into this, bring your knees nice and wide with your toes together, then shift your hips forward all the way down to the ground. It's very normal for your feet to come up off of the ground when your hips come down to the ground, but just keep the bottoms of your feet together and press your feet down toward the floor. Over time, we're working on bringing the knees wider and wider apart and your heels closer and closer to your bum, making sure that your thighs stay in contact with the floor as we work toward eventually having both our thighs and shins on the floor in this position. When doing these long static stretches, try to find a position where you're about a 7 out of 10 in challenge, so just enough that you feel the stretching sensation, but not so much that you have to wince or fidget to take stress off. If you are fidgeting during the motion, ideally it's to adjust deeper into the stretch as opposed to trying to come off of the stretch. And we're just going to take another 30-second rest in our kneeling tuck. And next we're going to move into a frog stretch. So bring your knees nice and wide with your knees bent roughly 90 degrees and the feet pointing out. From the side, try to make sure that your hips are stacked directly above your knees, so not in front or behind the knees. As you go through the stretch, try to use the outer thighs to pull the knees gradually further and further apart. Remember to be breathing through these stretches, so try to have a nice calm breathing pattern. Try not to hold your breath. Every time you exhale, think about relaxing the muscles of the inner thigh and pulling outward with the muscles of the outer thigh. And checking in periodically to make sure that your hips stay stacked over top of your knees. Up next, we'll be moving into frog rocking. So before you start this motion, bring your knees slightly closer together than in your full frog stretch, and then you're going to be rocking your hips forward and backward. Start off very slowly. You'll feel a much more intense sensation as you move your hip backwards. Take it slow. You don't want to feel any crunching or popping or grinding in the hips. If you do, just back off the stretch a little bit, bring the knees closer together. The popping and crunching will go away with time. And we finish off our stretch with a final kneeling tuck. Thanks so much for moving with me today. If you like what we did today, please comment below with any requests or suggestions for workouts that we could do together in the future.